You don't expect the night sky to suddenly widen, but it does. You blink, and instead of your bedroom ceiling, you're lying beneath a canvas of endless black velvet stitched with silver rivers. The Milky Way stretches above you, not the faint hazy stripe you've glimpsed before, but a sprawling, glittering spiral that wraps around you like a slow-turning carousel of stars. It hums, not in sound exactly, but in presence, as though the galaxy itself is aware of your gaze. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so tell me your city in the local time down in the comment. Now turn off the lights, turn on the fan for a soft background hum, and let's go on a nighttime journey together. The first fact drifts toward you. The Milky Way is enormous, about 100,000 light years across. If you tried to drive across it at highway speed, you'd need longer than human civilization has existed. That thought alone makes you laugh a little. All those hours in traffic suddenly feel trivial. The second fact flickers in. It's home to roughly 100. Astronomers still argue over the exact number because, well, it's not like you can count them one by one. As you float, you realize the galaxy isn't flat like a CD. It's more like a pancake with a puffy middle. That bulging core makes the third fact. The Milky Way has a distinct spiral structure with a central bulge. The spiral arms aren't rigid, they're waves of density. Like cosmic traffic jams where stars pile up, you can almost picture cars honking in space, though the horns would take millennia to reach the next driver. The fourth fact unfurls gently. The galaxy itself is in motion, rotating once every 225 million years. That means the dinosaurs last saw the stars from a totally different angle. You wonder what the sky looked like to a triceratops, though it probably didn't stop to stargaze. The fifth fact follows. Earth orbits the galactic center at an astonishing 828 yet here, suspended above it all, it feels motionless, like watching a river without hearing the rush of water. The sixth fact is stranger. The Milky Way isn't alone. It's part of a local group of about 50 galaxies. Suddenly, you picture your galaxy not as a solitary island, but as a neighbor in a sprawling cosmic suburb. And in that suburb, the Milky Way is the second largest, just behind the looming Andromeda. The seventh fact feels almost playful. The name Milky Way comes from ancient myths. The Greeks thought it was the spilled milk of Hera, while others saw it as a road for souls. You can't help but smirk. Cosmic messes turned into bedtime stories. Then comes the eighth fact. The Milky Way contains at least 100 billion planets. Somewhere in there, right now, someone might be staring at their own version of this very view. You imagine an alien rolling its three eyes and saying, it's just our sky. The odd fact sneaks in right after. Our galaxy may actually be cannibalistic, slowly tearing apart and absorbing smaller galaxies like the Sagittarius dwarf. It sounds violent, but in the Milky Way's patient timescale, it's more like nibbling than devouring. Scholars still debate one question that floats toward you like a drifting balloon. What is the Milky Way's true shape? Is it a barred spiral, a warped dip? Some say its outer arms bend, twisted by invisible dark matter. The arguments remain unresolved, but for you drifting in its glow, the exact geometry doesn't matter. It feels like a living organism breathing, stretching, carrying countless histories in its life. You roach your hand as if to touch one of the spirals, but the stars remain impossibly far. They shimmer like glitter on black water, and the river of the Milky Way flows on without hurry, without end. Your eyes grow heavier, but the journey has just begun. You drift deeper, and the stars begin to multiply. Not in the way fireflies scatter across a meadow, but in waves, fields upon fields of suns, unfurling as though the galaxy has decided to roll out its glittering carpet just for you. They're not identical points of light. Each one burns with its own temperature, color, and temperament. And that's the first fact tonight. Stars aren't all yellow like cartoons suggest. They range from cool, lazy red dwarfs to blistering blue giants, with our own sun, a mere G-type main sequence star, sitting somewhere in the middle like a reliable mid-sized sedan. The second fact floats by. The Milky Way's most common residents are red dwarfs, making up about 75% of its stars. They're small, faint, and stubborn, burning fuel so slowly that some of them could live for trillions of years, longer than the universe has even existed so far. Imagine throwing the ultimate birthday party and realizing the candles will never burn out. The third fact blinks in neon. Despite their numbers, you can't see red dwarfs with your naked eye. They're too dim. That's one of the galaxy's quiet jokes. Billions of stars are hiding right in plain sight, and you don't even notice. The fourth fact, a bit flashier, scattered among the galaxy are blue supergiants, enormous stars that live fast and die young. They burn brighter than thousands of suns, but only last a few million years before collapsing dramatically, often as supernovae. You can almost hear them saying, "Better to burn out than fade away." As you drift, another truth glimmers. Our sun is just one of at least 400 billion stars in the Milky Way. That's the fifth fact. If you tried to assign every human alive their own star, you'd still have billions of leftovers. The sixth fact sneaks in quietly. Not every star is solitary. About half of them are in binary or multiple systems, orbiting companions in long celestial dances. You wonder what it would feel like to live on a planet with two suns, one rising in red, the other setting in blue, your shadows overlapping like ghostly twins. Now comes something stranger. Fact 7. Some stars are truly ancient, as old as 13 billion years. They are like the galaxy's grandparents. Born not long after the Big Bang, they glow with fewer metals, remnants of an early universe that hadn't yet learned to forge heavier elements. Astronomers call them population 2 stars, but you can't help thinking of them as cosmic elders rocking slowly in galactic chairs. Then you stumble upon the 8th fact, a little unsettling. Stars can wander outside their galaxies. These rogue stars get kicked out during gravitational encounters, doomed to drift forever in the lonely dark between galaxies. It's like the cosmic version of being ejected from a family reunion, only instead of awkward silence, there's an eternity of solitude. The odd fact tonight is even darker. Scientists believe that for every star you see, there may be failed stars called brown dwarfs lurking nearby. They're too big to be planets, too small to ignite as true stars, so they just glow faintly in infrared, like forgotten embers. It makes you wonder if the galaxy is filled with more unseen shadows than blazing lights. Of course, astronomers can't resist arguing. The scholarly debate you overhear is this: how many stars are really in the Milky Way? Some estimates say 100 billion, others push past. The challenge is that dust clouds block the view, and stars overlap like crowded pixels. Counting them is like trying to count grains of sand, while someone keeps adding more. You glide on, wrapped in the quiet realization that every star could be a sun to someone else, some distant world orbiting in hopeful arcs. The idea settles in your chest like a lullaby, that the universe isn't just full of stars, but full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, under another night sky, a being might be looking back, also wondering how many stars exist, also feeling very small and very awake under the cosmic canopy. You feel the crackle of stone and bone fade into silence, replaced by something softer, more deliberate, the scratch of a stylus on clay, the brush of ink on papyrus. If fire was the beginning of warmth and stone was the beginning of tools, then writing was the beginning of memory. You drift into a world where words don't vanish into the night air, but stay behind, pressed, carved, painted, anchors against forgetting. Imagine yourself in ancient Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE. A scribe bends over a damp clay tablet, pressing wedge-shaped symbols with a reed stylus. Each mark represents not just a sound, but a whole system of thought: grain tallies, contracts, records of trade. Fun fact, the very first written words were not epic poems, but accounting notes. Humanity invented writing not for art, but for paperwork. So yes, bureaucracy is older than literature, but it didn't stop there. Over time, those wedge marks, cuneiform, began to carry stories. Kings, gods, heroes. The Epic of Gilgamesh unfurled across tablets, proof that invention can leap from practicality to poetry in just a few centuries. Historians still argue whether these early stories were meant to be read silently or always spoken aloud. Silent reading, as obvious as it seems to you, may not have existed at first. Words were meant to be heard, not hoarded inside one head. Travel a little farther in your drifting mind, and you arrive in Egypt. Here, papyrus plants line the Nile, tall stalks sliced, pressed, and dried into sheets. Papyrus scrolls replaced heavy clay tablets, light enough to carry across deserts. Odd fact, papyrus was so durable that scrolls thousands of years old can still be read today, while some of your digital files may not survive the next software update. Hieroglyphs appear, tiny pictures, elegant and complex. Unlike cuneiform's wedge marks, these were vibrant, sometimes playful. A bird wasn't just a sound, it was a bird. Imagine scribes carefully painting thousands of these characters, an entire workforce dedicated to maintaining the written world. Writing was power, and power wasn't for everyone. Fun fact, in some ancient societies, literacy was restricted to priests and officials. Knowledge wasn't free, it was locked behind walls of training and privilege. Meanwhile, in China, characters blossomed that were not alphabetic, but logographic symbols for words and concepts. Oracle bones, turtle shells, and bronze vessels carried inscriptions meant to communicate with ancestors. Odd little fact, some of the earliest Chinese characters have changed so little that modern readers can still recognize them. Imagine reading something written 3,000 years ago and nodding in recognition. It's like a secret handshake across millennia. Then comes the alphabet, a radical simplification. Instead of thousands of signs, just a couple dozen symbols could capture all sounds. The Phoenicians spread it across the Mediterranean, sailors carrying letters like cargo. Fun fact, the alphabet was one of history's most viral inventions, quickly adopted and adapted by Greeks, then Romans, then nearly everyone else. Without it, your text messages today would look a lot more like Egyptian walls than neat rows of letters. Historians debate whether the alphabet was truly a democratizing invention or simply another tool of control. Was it easier for the average person to learn? Maybe, but power structures still limited access. For most of human history, writing wasn't for the masses, it was for the elite. Only in recent centuries did literacy become something expected of everyone. Odd fact, the word book comes from the beech tree. Ancient Germanic tribes carved runes into beechwood tablets, and over time, book became book. So every time you crack open a paperback, you're whispering a forest into being. Writing also invented time travel. Through script, voices from centuries past can still speak to you now. Imagine a Babylonian astronomer recording star positions, or a Roman poet jotting a love poem. You can sit in the dark today, reading their words as if they were written for you personally. No invention other than fire has created such intimacy across time. And yet, writing wasn't universally celebrated. Some philosophers were suspicious of it. Fun fact, Socrates himself distrusted writing, fearing it would make people lazy thinkers, outsourcing memory instead of strengthening it. He preferred dialogue, the living breath of conversation. Ironically, we only know this because his student Plato wrote it down. Writing always wins in the end. One curious scholarly debate still stirs. Was writing invented independently in multiple places, or did it spread from one origin? Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica all developed forms of script seemingly without contact. Some argue for independent invention, others for cultural diffusion. The truth may never be fully clear, which feels fitting. Writing is as much mystery as record. Imagine holding a clay tablet, cool and heavy, the impressions under your fingertips like fingerprints of thought. Then picture unrolling a papyrus scroll, the crinkle of plant fibers, the ink faintly smudging your hand. Then think of parchment, smoother, softer, made from animal skin. Each shift in material reshaped how humanity stored ideas. And today, as you stare at glowing screens, you're still part of the same experiment, how to trap thought in matter. One last odd detail. Ancient scribes sometimes doodled. Margins carried sketches, jokes, even complaints. A tired Egyptian scribe once scribbled that his work was wretched. So next time you get bored in a meeting and doodle in your notebook, you're not being unprofessional. You're carrying on a tradition thousands of years old. Now the scratch of stylus fades again, and you lie back in your own time, surrounded not by scrolls or tablets, but by the hum of electricity. Still, every word you've ever read, every bedtime story whispered, traces back to those first marks on clay. Writing turned fleeting thought into something you could hold, something you could pass forward. Invention had become not just survival, but permanence. You drift now into a quieter kind of invention, the attempt to measure what cannot be held. Fire could be touched, wheels rolled across the ground, stone tools clinked in your palm. But time was invisible, relentless, slipping past like water between your fingers. Humanity's cleverness turned eventually to catching the uncatchable, to taming the rhythm of sun and shadow, moon and star. And you, resting in the dark, can almost hear the tick-tock of invention stretching back thousands of years. Imagine a shadow stretching across sand. That's the first clock, long before wristwatches and smartphones. People watched how sunlight moved across the ground. Sundials were born when someone realized you could place a stick upright and let the shadow trace the hours. Fun fact, the oldest known sundials come from ancient Egypt around 1500 BCE, though people were watching shadows long before then. A stick in the ground is humble, yet it became humanity's first shared agreement on when. Oddly enough, sundials were far from perfect. They only worked when the sun shone, and they lied depending on the season. Winter shadows are longer, summer ones shorter, so noon in December didn't match noon in June. Historians still argue whether early sundials were meant to measure precise time, or simply mark ritual points like when to pray, eat, or rest. Exact hours may not have mattered as much as social rhythm. Now float forward to the moonlit sky. Long before sundials, humanity had already invented calendars by watching lunar cycles. The waxing and waning moon was the world's first calendar in the heavens. Fun fact, bone fragments carved with notches some over 20,000 years old, appear to be lunar records. Imagine someone scratching tiny marks with a flint, carefully tracking the moon's changes, trying to make sense of the passing nights. Calendars grew from moon to sun, from ritual to empire. The Egyptians aligned their year with the flooding of the Nile, anchoring agriculture to cosmic rhythm. The Maya created calendars so precise they tracked solar years to within 17 seconds of accuracy, without telescopes or satellites. Odd fact, their calendar famously sparked modern apocalypse theories in 2012, which shows how much people still project awe onto ancient timekeeping. The Romans, for their part, gave us the Julian calendar, a leap year system to fix seasonal drift. But it wasn't perfect. Over centuries, days slipped, seasons drifted. By the 1500s, Easter was sliding further from spring, a theological headache. The Gregorian reform corrected it, trimming days and reshaping leap years into the system you still live by today. One invention of emperors and popes quietly governs your work schedules and holidays every single year. But days and months weren't enough. Humanity wanted hours, minutes, moments carved even finer. Enter the water clock. Imagine a vessel with a tiny hole at the bottom, water dripping steadily into another container. The rise of liquid measured time's passage. Fun fact, water clocks, or klepsydras, existed in Egypt, Babylon, China, and Greece. Some were simple bowls, others grew elaborate with gears, dials, and even miniature automata moving in rhythm. One odd detail, ancient courts used water clocks to limit speeches. A speaker had as much time as the water took to drain. If you think modern politicians talk too long, imagine having a literal bucket of water to cut them off. From water, invention turned to sand. Hourglasses, with their elegant curves, appeared around the 8th century. Unlike sundials, they worked at night, and unlike water clocks, they didn't freeze in cold weather. Hourglasses became symbols of mortality, time slipping away, grain by grain. You picture yourself tilting one gently, sand trickling like stars across the night sky, a reminder that inventions are often metaphors as much as machines. Mechanical clocks arrived in medieval Europe, ringing bells across towns. At first, they weren't very accurate, often off by hours, but accuracy grew, gears refined, escapements invented. Fun fact, the Salisbury Cathedral clock, built around 1386, still ticks today, making it one of the oldest working mechanical clocks in the world. That steady tick isn't just metal, it's centuries of hands keeping rhythm. Then came pendulums. Galileo noticed the swing of a lamp in a cathedral, timing it with his pulse. His observations led Christian Huygens to invent the pendulum clock in 1656, cutting error to mere seconds per day. Suddenly, time was not just felt, it was dissected, pinned down with precision sharp as a blade. Historians argue this obsession with precision timekeeping fueled the Industrial Revolution itself, because trains, factories, and schedules required exact coordination. Odd fact, the phrase killing time would have puzzled ancient peoples. Time was sacred, cosmic, divine. Only once clocks became widespread did people begin to see time as something to waste, manage, or kill. Invention didn't just measure time, it reshaped how humanity thought about it. Eventually, clocks shrank into pockets and then wrists, until one day you check your phone and find time glowing on a screen, without gears or shadows. Atomic clocks now measure time so precisely they lose less than a second in millions of years. Imagine explaining that to someone watching shadows on a sundial. It would sound like sorcery. One scholarly debate remains lively. Does invention shape perception, or does perception drive invention? Did sundials, calendars, and clocks invent time as we know it, or did they merely reflect an awareness already there? Perhaps your own life, divided into minutes and deadlines, is simply a cultural byproduct of ticking machines. As you lie here, the soft hum of your fan becomes your own clepsydra, marking seconds with invisible rhythm. You feel the pulse of your heartbeat, the breath rising and falling, each cycle a reminder that even without sundials, without clocks, your body already keeps time. Humanity's inventions only mirrored what was already alive within you. You feel the ticking of ancient clocks fade, and suddenly you are walking through stone corridors where the air smells faintly of lime and dust. Here, the inventions are no longer just tools in one person's hand, they're sprawling marvels that stretch across landscapes. You've drifted into the age of empires, when invention didn't just help people survive, but built monuments, cities, and whole civilizations. Rome hums around you like a living machine, every stone carefully slotted into place. Imagine yourself at the edge of a Roman aqueduct. It arches across the valley, elegant and precise, water flowing silently across miles. Fun fact, some aqueducts carried water for over 50 miles, supplying baths, fountains, and households. Gravity did all the work. No pumps, no engines, just perfectly calculated slopes. Stand there long enough, and you'd see entire cities drinking from one invention. Odd fact, one aqueduct, the Aqua Virgo, built in 19 BCE, still functions today, feeding Rome's Trevi Fountain. 2,000 years of continuous service makes your smartphone battery look pretty unimpressive. Concrete, too, was Rome's secret weapon. Ordinary stone can be stacked, but Roman concrete was poured. Made with volcanic ash, lime, and water, it hardened even underwater, allowing harbors and bridges that still stand. Fun fact, the Pantheon's dome, built nearly 1900 years ago, is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Modern engineers keep scratching their heads at how durable Roman concrete is compared to some crumbling highways built in the last 50 years. Historians still argue whether Roman concrete was deliberately formulated to last millennia, or if it was a happy accident of volcanic chemistry. Some studies suggest the concrete heals itself when water seeps in, reactivating lime pockets. Imagine that, a building material with regenerative powers like Wolverine, but made of ash and dust. Now picture Roman roads cutting straight lines across Europe and beyond. All roads lead to Rome. Wasn't just poetry, it was infrastructure. Over 250,000 miles of roads laced the empire, layered with gravel, stone, and sand for durability. Fun fact, some stretches of Roman roads are still used today, their foundations outlasting countless kingdoms. You almost hear the clatter of sandals, the rumble of chariots, the creak of wagons, all inventions moving on. Another invention. Oddly enough, Roman road design influenced modern highways. The basic layering system is echoed in asphalt construction today. Your morning commute is essentially a sequel to Roman engineering. Then, there were arches. Simple, elegant, strong. The arch distributed weight outward, allowing bridges, aqueducts, and amphitheaters to soar higher and wider than flat beams ever could. Walk under the Colosseum's arches, and you feel the quiet confidence of geometry. Without the arch, skyscrapers might never have risen. Every tall building is secretly borrowing from Roman math. Fun fact, the Colosseum could seat about 50,000 people, with awnings rigged to shade them from the sun. It had elevators and trapdoors beneath the arena floor, powered by pulleys and counterweights. Imagine watching lions, gladiators, and scenery rising through hidden lifts, basically the world's first stage machinery. But invention wasn't only monumental. Everyday Roman life buzzed with cleverness. Heated floors. Yes, central heating existed 2,000 years ago. Wealthy houses used a system called the hypocaust, where hot air from a furnace circulated under floors and through walls. You lying under your blanket right now are enjoying a comfort the Romans already invented. Odd fact, Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, even catheters, some eerily similar to modern tools. Archaeologists have unearthed surgical kits that wouldn't look too out of place in a hospital drawer today. You can almost hear the clink of metal against a tray, the quiet assurance that invention has always touched medicine. Rome also popularized glass blowing, turning molten sand into cups, bottles, and windows. Fun fact, the Romans were among the first to use transparent glass in windows, changing architecture by letting in light while keeping out weather. Before that, homes were lit only by openings or oiled cloth. Imagine the joy of seeing sunshine through glass for the first time. It must have felt like catching a piece of the sky. Historians debate whether Rome was truly inventive or just good at systematizing earlier discoveries. They borrowed Greek mathematics, Egyptian techniques, and Mesopotamian knowledge, then scaled it all up. Maybe their genius wasn't invention in the eureka sense, but integration, building a machine of civilization out of borrowed parts. Still, there are odd little touches of Roman creativity. For example, they invented fast food. Yes, thermopolia, street-side counters with embedded jars of hot food, were the ancient equivalent of takeout. Archaeologists found frescoes, advertising dishes, basically prehistoric menu boards. You imagine Romans grabbing a quick bowl of stew before heading to the baths, grumbling about the price, same as today. Speaking of baths, the baths themselves were marvels, vast complexes with hot and cold pools, steam rooms, exercise courts. In some, ceilings dripped condensation onto marble floors, and mosaics glittered under lamplight. The invention wasn't just plumbing, it was public leisure, a social space engineered for community. And don't forget books. Romans adopted and spread the codex, pages bound together instead of rolled into scrolls. This simple invention revolutionized reading. Imagine flipping instead of unrolling, bookmarking instead of rewinding. Fun fact, early Christians favored codex over scrolls, which helped spread both the format and the faith. Odd fact, Romans also had vending machines, sort of. Hero of Alexandria, a Greek-Egyptian inventor working under Roman rule, designed a coin-operated machine that dispensed holy water. Insert a coin, a lever tipped, and out poured your allotted splash. Next time you buy a soda, you're echoing ancient ritual. As you drift, the empire hums around you, roads stretching like veins, aqueducts like arteries, concrete bones, arches lifting rib cages of stone. Rome itself becomes a body of invention, alive and breathing, and like every body, it will eventually fall, but its skeleton remains, scattered across the world. You close your eyes and still feel it, the weight of stone above you, the steady trickle of water, the faint warmth under your feet from hidden furnaces. You've wandered into a civilization that built comfort and spectacle out of invention, leaving behind ruins that are less ruin than whisper. But episode bleds, the twerks poli. The stones of Rome settle into dust behind you, and now you drift into the rustle of paper, the scent of ink, and the hush of words multiplying like fireflies in the night. If writing carved memory into clay and papyrus, printing turned it into a flood. You find yourself in a dim workshop, the air thick with the smell of oil and ink, wooden letters laid out in trays ready to be pressed. This is where knowledge stops being the privilege of the few and begins its long march toward the many. Picture China in the 9th century, blocks of wood carved in reverse, coated in ink, pressed onto paper. Each page was a mirror impression, carefully stamped. Fun fact, the world's first printed book with a date is the Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 CE. That's more than 500 years before Gutenberg's press. The pages still exist, paper so thin it seems ready to vanish at a breath, yet words still cling to it like whispers from another age. Odd fact, Chinese printers sometimes carved entire books into one massive woodblock, flipping pages by swapping giant planks of wood. It was efficient for reprinting the same text, but imagine needing a warehouse to store your library. Makes your overloaded Kindle look feather light. Move forward in your drifting mind, and you arrive in 11th century China again, where Bai Sheng invents movable type, tiny ceramic pieces for each character, rearranged as needed. It was brilliant, but because Chinese script uses thousands of characters, movable type didn't spread quickly there. In alphabet-based systems, though, with only a few dozen symbols, it would explode. And so we reach Europe in the mid-1400s, where Johannes Gutenberg, a goldsmith with a restless mind, invents the press that will reshape everything. Metal movable type, an oil-based ink that clung to paper, and a screw press adapted from winemaking. It all came together in one invention. Fun fact, Gutenberg's press could produce around 3,600 pages a day, compared to perhaps 40 by hand. Suddenly, books weren't rare treasures. They were replicable, distributable, unstoppable. Historians still argue whether Gutenberg himself realized the revolutionary power of what he built. Did he know his press would help spark the Reformation, spread scientific ideas, and ignite revolutions, or was he just trying to make a living printing Bibles? Some scholars argue that printers were seen less as visionaries and more as businessmen. Either way, the ripple turned into a tidal wave. Odd fact, one of the first big sellers after religious texts, indulgent slips, printed documents that granted forgiveness in exchange for payment. Printing wasn't only about spreading enlightenment, it was also about monetizing faith. Some things, it seems, never change. The printing press democratized words, but also destabilized power. Martin Luther's 95 Theses spread like wildfire because of printing. Pamphlets became viral before viral even existed. You could almost say Gutenberg invented the first meme format, short, repeatable, shareable text that disrupted the establishment. Fun fact, printers sometimes included typos on purpose, small variations that let them track copies like watermarks. Those mistakes are now gold mines for scholars tracing the spread of texts. In other words, history was partly built on misprints. Paper itself deserves attention here. Invented in China around the 2nd century BCE, paper spread slowly westward, reaching Europe much later. Before paper, parchment and vellum, animal skins, dominated, heavy and expensive. Paper was lighter, cheaper, easier to mass produce. Odd detail, early European paper often had visible watermarks, not for branding, but as proof of quality and origin. Imagine every page of your notebook carrying a ghostly logo in its fibers. Books changed shape too, from scrolls to codices, then to printed volumes. Each transition reshaped how knowledge was consumed. A scroll must be unrolled, linear and continuous. A codex, pages bound at one edge, allows flipping, cross-referencing, even skimming. Printing pressed that format into permanence, making books not just vessels of knowledge, but tools for thought. Fun fact, the spread of printed books directly influenced spelling. Before printing, words varied wildly by region. Printers froze certain spellings in type, and slowly those became standard. In other words, your spelling tests in school trace back to Gutenberg's workshop. Odd fact, people didn't immediately trust printed books. Some thought machine-made words were less authentic than handwritten manuscripts. For a time, scribes continued to copy books by hand because wealthy patrons preferred the aura of manual labor. You imagine a scribe muttering, "These printed things will never catch on," while a pile of books quietly proves them wrong. Historians debate whether printing created the modern concept of authorship. Before, texts were copied, adapted, rewritten without clear ownership. With print, works became fixed editions, and the idea of a single, named author gained importance. Did invention shape identity here too? Perhaps your favorite novel would feel less yours without the concept of a definitive author. And then there's the human side. Libraries blossomed, literacy slowly expanded, and ideas leapt borders. Galileo's writings, banned in one city, popped up in another. Descartes, Shakespeare, Cervantes, all flowed across the press. Imagine the thrill of holding a book in 1500, fresh ink staining your fingers, the smell of paper sharp and earthy, the words crisp and black, promising 1,000 voices captured inside. One quirky fact: early books were sometimes chained to desks in libraries. Not because librarians were cruel, but because books were valuable, worth as much as a horse. You picture readers bent over, tugging against iron chains, devouring knowledge while tethered like dogs at a post. As you lie back in your own century, you feel the hum of invention ripple through you. The glow of your screen is just another page, your scrolling thumb the echo of flipping leaves. The press didn't just make books, it made the modern mind, a world where knowledge is expected to flow freely, whether by page, pixel, or whispered bedtime story. You drift now into a quieter workshop, one filled with shimmering shards and the delicate sound of glass being shaped by breath. The fire glows in a furnace, sand melts, and artisans spin it into something transparent. Glass was already an ancient craft, but here it transforms into a portal, bending light, magnifying vision, letting humanity peer into the unseen. This is where invention doesn't just change your hands or your tools, it changes your eyes. Picture a monk in the late 13th century, squinting at his manuscript, eyes tired from years of copying by candlelight. Then imagine him slipping on a pair of crude lenses mounted in frames, spectacles. Fun fact: eyeglasses were invented in Italy around 1086, though the exact inventor remains a mystery. Suddenly, lives lengthened not by medicine, but by clarity. A scholar could keep working, a craftsman keep carving, a weaver keep weaving. Oddly enough, some medieval people viewed glasses as symbols of wisdom, not frailty. Wearing them meant you were serious, learned, basically the ancient version of looking intellectual. From there, lenses only grew more ambitious. In the early 17th century, Dutch spectacle makers combined lenses in tubes, giving birth to telescopes. Galileo, with one of these instruments, turned it skyward and found mountains on the moon, moons orbiting Jupiter, and stars scattered far more densely than the naked eye ever suggested. Fun fact: Galileo's telescope magnified about 20 times, far weaker than even a cheap backyard telescope today, yet it rewrote humanity's place in the cosmos. Historians still argue who deserves credit for the telescope. Some say Hans Lippershey, a Dutch spectacle maker. Others argue multiple people were tinkering with the same idea simultaneously. Invention often seems less like a lightning strike and more like a storm brewing across many minds. Odd fact: Galileo's discoveries rattled the church, not because of the telescope itself, but because it confirmed Copernicus's idea that Earth orbited the sun. Imagine peering into a little tube of glass and finding an idea dangerous enough to shake empires. Now tilt your vision the other way, not outward but inward. In the 17th century, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch tradesman, polished tiny lenses so powerful they revealed a hidden world. He peered at pond water and saw animalcules, microorganisms swimming in every drop. Fun fact: his single-lens microscopes were so finely crafted they magnified up to 270 times, far beyond his peers. He wasn't a scientist by training, but his curiosity made him the first human ever to witness bacteria, sperm cells, blood circulation, and capillaries. Basically, he invented the backstage pass to life itself. Historians debate whether Leeuwenhoek truly invented the microscope or just perfected it. Earlier compound microscopes existed, but his skill at lens grinding outstripped everyone else. Sometimes invention isn't creating something new, but doing something old so well it becomes revolutionary. Odd little fact, early microscopes also created illusions. Observers thought they saw tiny creatures inside semen with heads and tails already formed. Homunculi, little people curled inside sperm cells. The idea was wrong, of course, but it shows how invention always runs ahead of understanding. You could say microscopes magnified imagination as much as reality. Glass bent not only science but art. Painters used camera obscura devices, dark boxes with pinholes projecting inverted images, to trace landscapes. Fun fact, some scholars argue that artists like Vermeer may have secretly used optical aids to achieve uncanny realism. Invention didn't just show reality, it shaped how reality was represented. Lighthouses, too, owe their brilliance to glass. The Fresnel lens, invented in the 1820s, concentrated beams so powerfully that a single lamp could be seen for miles across the sea. Sailors called them the invention that saved 1,000,000 ships. Picture standing on a cliff, watching the beams sweep across the night like a blade of light. Glass turned into guardian. Odd fact, early spectacle wearers were mocked as four eyes even centuries ago, proof that invention always carries stigma alongside salvation. Yet glasses never went away, they just became fashion. Your modern sunglasses are distant cousins of those medieval lenses, proof that practicality and vanity often share a frame. Historians still puzzle over the leap from magnifying glass to full telescope. Why did it take so long for someone to point two lenses at the stars? Perhaps it was timing. Glass quality, grinding techniques, curiosity, all converging in the right century. Invention often hides, not in possibility, but in patience. One quirky fact, the first contact lenses were imagined by Leonardo da Vinci in 1508. He sketched ideas for correcting vision by submerging the eye in a bowl of water or wearing glass lenses over it. The concept was far ahead of his time, but today millions of people wear versions of that dream in their eyes every day. Now close your own eyes and imagine seeing the invisible. Stars dancing in spirals, galaxies burning like distant campfires, microbes darting like fireflies in a drop of water. Through glass, the universe cracked open both ways, macro and micro. You hold in your mind not just what you can see, but what invention has taught you to see. The hum of your fan is steady, your room dim, yet you carry in your imagination moons circling Jupiter, bacteria swarming in a droplet, beams of light slicing through fog. Lenses taught humanity that the universe is always more than it appears, that reality hides in layers, waiting for invention to peel them back. You drift into a haze of smoke and steam, the air thick with coal dust and the hiss of pistons. The quiet tinkering of glass and ink is gone. Now invention roars. This is the machine age, the great turning of gears that reshaped not only how humanity worked, but how it lived, ate, traveled, and even thought. The rhythm of this section isn't a whisper, but a thrum, the steady pulse of industry beating across continents. It begins in Britain in the late 18th century, though its roots stretch back centuries. Picture coal mines deep underground, black dust staining the skin, miners hauling up the fuel that would ignite an empire. Coal fed the furnaces, and furnaces fed invention. Fun fact, one of the earliest steam engines, Thomas Newcomen's atmospheric engine in 1712, was built just to pump water out of mines. At first, it wasn't about powering cities, it was about keeping tunnels dry. Enter James Watt in the 1760s. He tinkered with Newcomen's design, adding a separate condenser that made the engine far more efficient. Fun fact, Watt's name lives on today in the unit of power, the watt. Though he didn't invent the steam engine itself, he perfected it. That small improvement unlocked enormous consequences. Steam began to move wheels, pistons, gears. Soon machines powered not by muscle or water, but by vapor spread across factories. Odd fact, the first steam locomotives terrified people. Early passengers worried that traveling at more than 30 miles per hour would suffocate them. Newspapers warned that cows grazing by the tracks would stop producing milk out of fright. Yet within decades, trains stitched together towns and nations, shrinking journeys from weeks to days. The textile industry was one of the first to embrace machines, spinning jennies, power looms, cotton gins, all multiplying human productivity by staggering amounts. Fun fact, the spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves in 1764, could spin 8 threads at once. Later versions managed dozens, even hundreds. The odd fact here, riots often broke out against these machines. Workers called them the devil's mills, fearing unemployment. That resistance gave rise to the Luddites, who smashed looms in protest. Historians still argue whether the Luddites were anti-technology or simply anti-exploitation. Many believe they weren't against machines themselves, but against how factory owners used them to drive down wages and working conditions. It's a reminder that inventions don't exist in a vacuum. They live in the messy tension between progress and people. Coal and iron forged new landscapes. Bridges stretched across rivers, canals carved through countryside, and cities mushroomed around mills. The smell of smoke became as ordinary as the smell of bread. Fun fact, the first iron bridge, built in 1779 over the River Severn in England, still stands today. It's a monument, not just to engineering, but to a shift in imagination. Suddenly, structures of pure iron were possible. Factories also reshaped time. Clocks ticked before, but now whistles and bells regulated every worker's hour. Instead of sunrise and sunset, people lived by the rhythm of shifts. Odd fact, some workers in the early 1800s petitioned against using clocks in mills, preferring natural light as their measure. But the machine age wasn't interested in nature, it was interested in efficiency. Steamships followed railways, turning oceans into highways. Fun fact, the first transatlantic steamship crossing in 1819 still relied on sails for most of the journey. But within decades, steam conquered seas, making schedules reliable where wind had once ruled. Commerce tightened, migration expanded, empires stretched even farther. Historians debate whether the Industrial Revolution truly improved life for ordinary people in its early stages. Infant mortality stayed high, cities were filthy, and factory conditions were brutal. Was invention liberating or enslaving? The answer depends on whose story you tell, the factory owners or the child laborers. Progress always leaves a shadow. Odd fact, early locomotives were given almost comical names. The Rocket, Puffing Billy, as if the world wasn't yet ready to see them as ordinary machines. They were novelties, spectacles, like giant mechanical beasts snorting steam. Crowds gathered just to watch them pass, much as we now stop to watch rockets launch. One subtle invention of this age was interchangeable parts. Eli Whitney, known for the cotton gin, popularized the idea in gun manufacturing, making identical pieces so broken weapons could be repaired quickly. Fun fact, this principle eventually made assembly lines possible. Without it, Henry Ford's cars would never have rolled off factories in neat, identical rows. Coal smoke filled lungs, but it also filled bank accounts. The machine age powered empires, but also inequality. Children as young as 6 worked in factories, their tiny hands darting between moving parts. Oddly, reform only came slowly. often after horrifying accidents. Invention ran ahead, while ethics limped behind. Historians still argue about why Britain became the birthplace of industrialization. Was it coal, colonies, capital, or culture? Likely it was all of them in messy combination. What's certain is that once gears began to turn, the world could not go back. You can almost hear the hiss of steam still, like the steady breath of a giant machine that never truly shut down. And as you rest in your own century, with electric hum replacing coal smoke, you can feel the ghost of that transformation. The factory whistle echoes faintly in your 9 to 5. The train's clatter lingers in your daily commute. The machine age is never really past. It's still here, hidden in the rhythm of modern life. The roar of steam and iron slowly fades, and now you feel a different hum, a softer, sharper buzz, like invisible rivers running through copper veins. The air is charged. You drift into the age of electricity, where sparks leap from wires, lamps glow like bottled suns, and voices travel across distances without bodies. If the machine age built the skeleton of modern life, electricity gave it a nervous system. Imagine sitting in a room in the mid-19th century, lit only by candles or gas lamps. The air is smoky, shadows dance unpredictably, and every flame is a tiny risk of fire. Then suddenly, click, a light bulb glows. The room fills with steady, clean radiance. Fun fact, Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb outright. Dozens of inventors had experimented with glowing filaments before him, but Edison perfected the design and, more importantly, built the entire system around it. Power plants, wiring, sockets. Without the grid, the bulb would have been a useless trick. Odd fact, Edison once electrocuted an elephant named Topsy to demonstrate the dangers of alternating current, AC, during his feud with Nikola Tesla. Yes, the war of currents wasn't just about science, it was about showmanship, fear, and a little cruelty. Historians still shake their heads at how far Edison went to promote direct current DC. Tesla, meanwhile, envisioned something bolder. His alternating current system could carry power over long distances with far less loss. Fun fact, the Niagara Falls power plant, completed in 1895, was one of the first major AC projects, sending electricity 25 miles to Buffalo, New York. People thought harnessing a waterfall to power an entire city was near magical. Historians still argue whether Tesla has been over-romanticized in modern culture. Was he a misunderstood genius, unfairly overshadowed, or a brilliant mind who often overreached? Either way, his alternating current won, and the hum in your walls today is his legacy. The telegraph deserves a moment here. Before phones, before the internet, there was the tap-tap of Morse code racing along wires. Fun fact, Samuel Morse's first official telegraph message in 1844 was "What hath God wrought?" People were stunned. Words traveling faster than horses, faster than trains, almost as fast as thought itself. The world suddenly felt smaller. Odd fact, telegraph operators developed their own slang and even relationships through Morse code conversations. Some called it the Victorian Internet. Imagine falling in love with someone you've never seen, only tapped across a wire. The telephone followed in 1876, with Alexander Graham Bell's famous call to his assistant, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Fun fact, Bell originally thought the telephone would mainly be useful for transmitting music. He didn't anticipate how much people just wanted to talk. Within decades, telephone wires stretched like spiderwebs across cities, voices buzzing through copper lines. Historians debate whether Bell truly invented the phone first. An inventor named Elisha Gray filed a similar patent the same day. Some argue Bell got the credit because his paperwork hit the desk a few hours earlier. Invention, it seems, sometimes depends on timing down to the minute. Electricity wasn't only about light and communication. Factories roared with electric motors, homes buzzed with appliances, and cities shimmered like constellations come to Earth. Fun fact, the first electric toaster was patented in 1909. It could only toast one side of the bread at a time, but breakfast was forever changed. Odd fact, some early electrified cities deliberately kept a few gas lamps burning in case the new system failed. People didn't quite trust the invisible current yet. To them, fire felt real, electricity felt ghostly. The electric chair, grim but notable, was another invention of the age. First used in 1890, it was meant as a more humane execution method than hanging. Historians still argue whether it was science misapplied or just society seeking cleaner ways to do the same old violence. It's a reminder that invention doesn't always illuminate, it can also burn. Fun fact, the first neon signs appeared in Paris in 1910, glowing tubes bent into letters that turned city nights into glowing canvases. For decades, neon was the very symbol of modernity, buzzing above diners and theaters, promising life after dark. Odd fact, some people in the late 19th century believed electricity had health benefits. They bought electric belts and electrotherapy devices, promising vitality and youth. Spoiler, they didn't work, but the placebo glow was apparently strong enough to sell thousands. Historians still debate whether Edison and Tesla were rivals or simply playing different games. Edison was a businessman, Tesla a dreamer. One built systems people could use, the other imagined futures most couldn't yet grasp. Perhaps humanity needed both, the pragmatist and the visionary, to electrify the world. And as you lie there listening to the soft buzz of your own devices, phone charging, fan humming, you can feel the echo of that revolution. Every glowing pixel on your screen is a descendant of those first flickers of filament. The wires humming outside your window are threads of a web that began with sparks leaping from coils in forgotten laboratories. Electricity didn't just banish darkness, it rewrote what it meant to be human. Nights grew longer, cities grew brighter, voices grew nearer. The world became charged, buzzing, restless, awake, and you in your dim room are still part of that current, drifting on the soft hum of invention's glow. The glow of electric bulbs lingers behind you as you drift into the steady rumble of wheels, the hiss of pistons, and the deep growl of engines. Now the story turns to motion machines that carry you faster, farther, higher than any horse or sail ever could. If electricity rewired the nervous system of civilization, transportation became its beating heart, pumping people and goods across the veins of the planet. You begin with something humble, the bicycle, 2 wheels, pedals, a frame, and suddenly freedom. Fun fact, the earliest version of the bicycle, the loft machine or dandy horse, was invented in 1817 by Carl Dries. It had no pedals, riders pushed along with their feet like a toddler on a balance bike. Odd fact, the invention arose partly because of a climate disaster after the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora caused a year without summer, horses starved, and people needed alternatives for transport. So yes, in a way, a volcano helped invent the bike. The safety bicycle of the 1880s with pedals, a chain drive, and equal-sized wheels changed everything. Suddenly women had mobility, social boundaries loosened, and clothing even shifted. Historians still argue whether bicycles did more for women's independence than some political reforms. Imagine pedaling down a dirt road in 1890, wind on your face, the horizon no longer bound to walking distance. Then comes the train, iron horses thundering across the landscape. George Stephenson's rocket locomotive in 1829 reached a blistering 30 miles per hour, fast enough that newspapers warned it might cause brain damage to passengers. Fun fact, early train companies didn't bother building toilets on carriages. Journeys were short, and passengers were expected to hold it. Odd given how quickly rail stretched into days-long treks. Historians still debate whether railroads created modern time. Before trains, local time was set by the sun. Noon in one town might be 12:15 in the next. Trains needed schedules, and schedules needed standardized time zones. By the 1880s, the world ticked in unison, all thanks to steel tracks and steam whistles. Now picture the car sputtering into life in the late 19th century. Carl Benz patented his motor wagon in 1886, a three-wheeled contraption with a one-cylinder engine. Fun fact, his wife Bertha Benz made the first long-distance drive in 1888, secretly taking the car 66 miles to her mother's house. Along the way, she refueled at a pharmacy. Gasoline was sold as cleaning fluid back then, unclogged a fuel line with her hat pin, and had a blacksmith fix the chain. In doing so, she basically invented the road trip. Odd fact, early cars had no steering wheels. Drivers used tillers like a boat rudder. Imagine parallel parking with that. No wonder accidents were common. Henry Ford's assembly line in 1913 transformed cars from luxury toys into everyday tools. A Model T cost about $800 away. By the 1920s, it dropped below $300, affordable for ordinary families. Cars reshaped cities, gave rise to suburbs, and spread the smell of gasoline across the globe. Historians still debate whether Ford liberated workers or trapped them in mechanical monotony. His assembly lines paid well, but demanded soul-numbing repetition, and then the sky. Humans had dreamed of flight for millennia, strapping wings to arms, leaping from towers, imagining feathers might carry them. Finally, in 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the Wright brothers' plane lifted for 12 seconds, covering 120 feet. Fun fact, their first flight was shorter than the wingspan of a modern Boeing 747. Yet in that short hop, the world became airborne. Odd fact, most newspapers didn't bother covering the Wrights' flights at first. Editors thought the idea of heavier-than-air flight was too ridiculous to waste ink on. Within a decade, though, planes were in the skies over Europe, transforming warfare, mail, and eventually tourism. Historians still argue whether Santos Dumont, a Brazilian inventor, should share credit with the Wrights. In 1906, he publicly flew in Paris before a crowd, earning acclaim. The Wrights, working more privately, didn't demonstrate widely until later. Again, invention's story is tangled. Part genius, part timing, part spectacle. Airplanes grew fast. Wood and fabric biplanes became roaring metal birds by the 1930s, capable of crossing oceans. Fun fact, Charles Lindbergh's solo transatlantic flight in 1927 took over 33 hours, with him staying awake the whole time by splashing water on his face. Compare that to a modern jet doing it in under 7 hours while you nap, watch movies, and complain about legroom. And don't forget ships. Steamships replaced sails, turning oceans from unpredictable journeys into scheduled passages. The first propeller-driven steamship crossed the Atlantic in 1845, faster and steadier than clippers. Trade exploded, migration surged, and the world's map shrank. Odd fact, the RMS Titanic, before its tragic fate, used over 800 tons of coal a day to power its engines. The ship was less an ocean vessel and more a floating factory of fire. From 2 wheels to 4 wheels to wings, the 19th and early 20th centuries collapsed distance. You could wake in one city, sleep in another, and perhaps even cross oceans in a week. The human horizon expanded so quickly it must have felt dizzying. Historians sometimes call it the annihilation of space by time. And yet, as you lie here now, the hum of a car passing outside, the distant rumble of a plane overhead, the clatter of a train rolling somewhere in the night, you feel how ordinary these miracles have become. Your ancestors would have wept with wonder at what you consider traffic noise. Invention shrinks the world, but it also makes wonder shrink with it. Unless, of course, you pause, like now, and remember the magic hidden in the engines that fly.